My name is Peter Young, and I'm the Yale class of 1974, Brantford, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to our 31st Yale Career Panel that we have done over the last 7 years. We also have a new series, which we started a couple of years ago on fireside chats on career issues, on networking, on making major career changes, etc. But this is a series on career panels. I'd like to take a few minutes and just explain why we started these. And first of all, I want to thank two of my co-conspirators, Julie Son and Trish Takimoto. Trish they're here in the audience, and Trish was here from the very first one, which we did on the legal profession. And the reason why we did this was a very simple reason. Many of us recruit at Yale at undergraduate, graduate level. And the one thing that we came to realize is although Yale does a terrific job educating people in their major, whatever, one of the things is that for a lot of them, they didn't have really good information about different careers. Not just facts, but more, what is it really like on a candid basis? And the sad thing is that many people go into professions for the wrong reasons, because they watched too many episodes of NCIS and think that it's really sexy to be a forensics scientist. By the way, you don't have touch screens and fancy offices and lighting if you work for the New York Department of Forensic Science. It's just not true. Or law, where you don't solve a case every 50 minutes at each commercial break and so forth. Or medical, right? When pretty much every medical show is very sexy and you really just want to be a doctor. So we're not trying to discourage people from any particular profession, but the purpose is really to allow them to go in with their eyes open, right? So that they really know the good, the bad, where things are headed. And in particular, because a lot of professions are going through change. What it's going to be like to be a doctor 10 years from now is dramatically different than today and 10 years ago. And since if you're picking a career, you plan to be in it for a while, it's very important to get knowledgeable people to tell you where is it heading and what does it all mean. So today's career is music, and I'm very, very pleased to have our particular panel here. We have a composer, we have a clarinetist, a recording artist, we have a conductor. I did get an email criticizing, saying you're not diverse enough. Where's the hip hop artists, right? So we apologize for those people who really, wanted to pursue hip hop. The format's very straightforward. I have a set of questions that I will ask about the profession, and then we want to make sure that we leave about 10 or 15 minutes in the end for questions from the audience. I just want to let you know we have a wonderful audience of people here in the Great Hall at the Rose Alumni House at Yale on York Street, and then we have a very large group of people who are online. I think we have a total of 103 who registered for this event. So, and when we get to the Q&A portion, it'll be easier for us to call on people here who have questions here in the audience, but also there's a chat function for those of you who are online, and all you have to do is type in the question that you would like, and Trish will read it off, and then if you want to ask a particular panelist, mention by name, otherwise you can direct it to everyone. So before we get started, I'd like I'm going to introduce the panelists. By the way, we apologize. One of the panelists is ill, and so Wei Yi Yang is not with us, and we wish him well. But maybe starting from my right to the left, if each panelist could introduce themselves and take a minute or two and just say, what do they do today, and a little bit about their career.
Sure. Peter, thank you very much, and great to be here. I'm Chris Theophanides. I'm the chair of the composition program at the Yale School of Music. I'm also a composer full-time, and I direct the composition program, co-direct that composition program at the Aspen Music Festival in the summers.
Okay, great.
Hi, my name is Sung-hee Lee, and I'm a clarinetist. Currently I'm a recording artist, which means I produce recordings, and I have a record company called Musica Solis, where that's the release of where the CDs come out. And I also do lectures on music entrepreneurship and what it is to become a musician. and how to really thrive in your business. Yeah, that's what I do.
Okay.
I'm Richard Gard, and I'm a lifelong musician. But first, Peter, I'll say, if you see the show on the music teaching business, it is every bit as sexy in that and the real. If and when we get a TV show on that, it will represent.
Well, I watched the Grammys last night, and I said it seems sexy to me.
It is, yeah. My parents were musicians, and I've been a lifelong musician, a church musician, every kind of performance, band, combo, musicals. I've been a conductor of almost every genre. I run the hearing and musician department at the School of Music, as well as all lessons for the university. And I am a co-inventor on a couple of apps for music education, and have several successful apps out in the wild now.
Okay,
Awesome.
great. By the way, I'll tell a secret. Although I run an investment banking firm, I loved music and grew up with a lot of music when I grew up, all the way past Yale, and performed at small clubs in New York when I finished. And then one day the club owner said to me, you know, Peter, I don't know what choice you should make, but you've got to choose. You can't be in finance and a musician at the same time. So he said, you got to choose one or the other. And so I'm not sure I made the right choice, but anyway, I made a choice. So let's start out because, you know, the music profession, like a lot of professions, is going through a lot of change and has a lot of mythology, right? And it's really no different than law or film or drama film or any of those. So maybe we could start out though and sort of put the crystal ball in front of you and say, you know, what do you see? Where do you see the profession heading, good and bad? And at least mentioning one thing, which is clearly the change in the music industry with the internet and so forth. This is one example of a huge change that's had an impact. So maybe if we can maybe start with Richard and just say, you know, what do you see where do you see the profession, you know, headed, good or bad, right?
Musician as a profession, the idea is that usually you do not have one tiny field that you may fit in. So it is wrong to think that if you go for a degree in music, the only thing you're going to be doing is performing someplace. That you may be that, but that is really a very small part of it. So you're usually looking for ways to use your talents, which are really in self-discipline, project management, having a vision of something, bringing it to bear, bringing it and finding the audience for it. It's really, I find that musicians make great product managers in this way. And so where we're going, we have less and less of the, say, for us in a field where we have a master's degree or a doctorate degree in so-called classical music or serious music, that where we looked for in the past maybe to work was in an academic setting of a certain kind or a major orchestral organization or something like that. And that has definitely, the orchestral side is very, very small. The organized thing with venues and agents, that is almost all gone. But what has opened up is with the internet and the millions of niche markets that are now available, really anybody that is passionate about their performance or whatever it is they're creating as a content creator now. There's infinite channels for you to go on, and in a way, not having those few places and those few agents as the gatekeepers has opened up a tremendous opportunity for people that have the drive, the passion, and the talent to create something and share it.
And also I remind you that it's not just performance oriented. In other words, there are large parts of music that have nothing to do with being a performer.
Absolutely.
Example, right? And, you know.
But not much.
Not much. Well, son?
Yeah.
So where's the profession headed, good or bad?
Yeah, well, both. So I'm a clarinetist. So as a clarinet musician, I guess the trajectory of your career would be to play in an orchestra. So that's what I practiced all my life is orchestra excerpts. So right I graduated from Yale School of Music, and my first job was a principal clarinet position in an orchestra in Korea. And a month and a half into the job, I realized, oh my goodness, this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. you know, for most people it'd be like, oh yeah, I got a job. It's, you know, it's really hard to get one of these positions. But for me, when I actually sat there in that seat and played with the orchestra, I realized this is not for me. This is really not for me. So I lasted about 2 years, and then I said goodbye and closed that chapter in my life, and I never looked back. And I think for musicians, it's really like, just like what you were saying, music can go anywhere. It doesn't have to be what you think it should be, but in life is very long, and you could take your musical training to any aspect of career. And
I'm going to interrupt because that's question number 3,
okay.
which is, yeah, that's question number 3. So you jumped ahead.
Okay.
Probably you did that when you were at Yale. No, the question is stepping back rather than your own personal career, but the profession itself, right? Where is it headed? So independent of your own personal thing, where do you see it heading? What are the changes that are good and bad for the profession itself, right?
Oh, well, good in a way that, like we were saying, there's the internet is really tremendously helped the independent artists to really get their work out. And that is, I think it's, this is a really good time to be an independent artist because of those reasons. You don't need the middleman anymore. The bad thing is that because everybody's doing the same thing, that how do you stand out? You know, and it really comes down to your core, you know, thing that you believe in. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I want to echo what Richard said, especially. I mean, I think that the structural institutions are really in big trouble. So all of the orchestras that we know and love, the first to fall was, you know, Philadelphia, which is one of the big 5 orchestras. They had terrible pension problems. It was causing all kinds of problems. And so many of the major orchestras are going through, these are $100 million a year institutions that can't support post-2008. Really, we saw the effects of it on these nonprofits in 2010, 2011, and the support has not been there since. And so they're really downsizing in a pretty serious way. And so what's happened, the positive side of all that has been that a lot of kind of grassroots, do-it-yourself, you know, build your own vision companies from the larger institutions like opera companies become like cabaret storytelling venue kind of mediums, things that are more nimble and sustainable on a local level. That's happening quite a bit. And I think, you know, basically what has to happen as somebody coming up as a musician now is that you have to be constantly making connections. And I don't mean that in a political way. I mean thinking about the way things tie together, the way you can interact with your local military base, with whatever it is, to try to get a series of conversations going that make you valuable and make you useful and allow you to do what you know music can do really well, which is communicate, share, bring people together, and do it in a wonderful way.
Well, you're sort of pointing out some sub-trends that are actually very important. One is classical music versus, you know, R&B and rap and so forth. And I think so many of the traditional classical orchestras, so forth, they're struggling because they're losing the audiences, right? Now, there's separate problems with people who are in rap music and so forth, such as, you know, how do you make money on iTunes at a couple of cents per song? But that's a particular problem, I think, for the classical music side, right? Which is they're losing share of the audience, right?
Right, and I think I don't think that most students make those distinctions of, I mean, they're just as likely to kind of engage something not on those stylistic differences or those genre differences. So Kendrick Lamar won the Pulitzer Prize this past year. It's a big deal. I mean, that's because the music is really great and it's really interesting and it's great music, period. And that's the way people are starting to see those things. So I think, and you know, most of our composers, I would say, I see one of them here actually now, we have some people who are coming from the indie pop background, and they're bringing that to bear in the context of concert music. So those boundaries are starting to be a little bit more porous, and I think it's only a good thing, but it also means that structurally, probably what's going to happen is things, well, it's already happening. Things like the venues for performances are not going to be the box concert halls. They're not going to be the churches of this, that, and the other thing. It's going to be where people go to hear interesting things.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think music is going through a structural change that the economics of music is being undermined, right? Regardless of what genre, right? I mean, because even if you talk about the people who are performers, you know, like Lady Gaga and so forth, the amount of money they make from recordings and so forth is small. They got to go out and do concerts, and so even they are not having a fun time from an economic point of view. So one of the issues is it's not that there isn't a great deal of interest in music and demand for music. It's the economics are getting
There's more interest than ever in music, and there's more ways to broadcast and share and market and find a niche. There's more miniature niches. If you are interested in Norwegian polka music played on zithers, I'm sure there's a channel someplace for that. So there's more ways than ever.
That's Sonny's favorite genre, actually.
Yeah, and yes, the ways of getting paid are all changing right now. And I would think actually for the average person, it's getting better because again, the big institutions, the agents, the few agencies that ran this, it really is a wall to the average person. And now, in a way, it's like the idea that you're going to be one of the ones that becomes famous. And really, like Lady Gaga, yes, she's a musician, but really her business is celebrity. And that's a different thing from being a musician, really. And to do that, that's running celebrity. And you may or may not be much of a musician. You may be a fabulous musician and you're a terrible runner of celebrity business. But for her, or stars like that, the mega stars, that's a whole different world. And many people might get into it and not like it.
But in her case, people don't know that she went to Juilliard. She was a classically trained
musician. There's two businesses going on.
Right, and she happens to be a good singer,
and
right?
She's fantastic. But again, to manage something like that, then you have to manage your branding, your various revenues. How do you monetize all this? You have to you're a business then.
Yep.
Now, you could look at the music profession and just say, oh, this is just like journalism. The internet's undermining, you know, the economics and so forth. Woe is me. What do we do? On the other hand, are there new opportunities and new economics that are opening up for people in the music that you can think of, right? I mean, 15 years ago, no one even imagined that the internet would affect the music business the way it has, right? Or the journalistic business, right? When Google first started, right? No one had the foresight. But is there anything that you can see, or some little trends of things that are positive that are going to affect the music industry and its economics in a positive way? Any? If not, if the answer is no, that's okay, right?
It's all positive.
I would say, you know, one of the big problems traditionally going back hundreds of years actually for musicians and probably for creative artists in general is that we're really contract based. I mean, we're project based. We're, you know, so, you know, you're lucky if you had the patronage of the church or Lorenzo de Medici or you know, a university or some structural thing that kept you afloat, which is the thing that's in play right now, that things are changing so much. But most of like half of what I do, really more than half, is I'm out traveling to orchestras, traveling to ensembles, doing residencies, working with musicians. And that's a one-time thing that might last 3 days, it might last 2 months, it might last a week, whatever it is, and then it's over. So the list of, like, you know, 1099s that I have are, you know, it's quite formidable. I mean, it's like you're an independent contractor most of the time. And, you know, so that is the thing to kind of reconcile, is that sense of, that's what's unstable about the profession in general. And I think some people do better with that than others. And it's always been a kind of feast or famine thing. So, you know, the top of the crew, the Lady Gagas and so forth, are doing great, their business celebrity side. And then there are people, like I would say in the concert music profession, who are famous and poor, you know, because fame and wealth don't go together in our field a lot of times. And so there's a little bit of that going on. On the plus side, I mean, I think it's only, the great thing is, I mean, you know, people have to know what they're good at and what they're not good at. So I used to run a new music festival, and I was a terrible, like, administrator. I had the big artistic vision. So I found the right person to be with to help realize that thing. And I think that's part of what it is as an artist. Like, not everybody can handle the celebrity side management of what they're doing. But there are people who do that, who are interested in that, that if you're smart enough to kind of pair up with, and you know what the balance is, you can.
Yeah, so that's a good example of a non-performing profession that can have an important role. By the way, I made a mistake. Normally in all of these, I always start out saying that one of the things that this panel cannot do, and I'm reminded this from what you said, is something that you have to do before any of this becomes relevant, which is to know yourself, right? Because you can get all the good advice in the world, but if you don't know yourself in terms of what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you like or don't like, so forth, then you're still not going to make the right choice. And so I just encourage all of you to, first step, really get an objective understanding of yourself, what you like, don't like, what are you really good at, as opposed to what you think you're good at, and rely on friends and other people to help you, keep you honest. And that's really sort of what you were saying a little bit, which is a lot of it is, the fit. Now I'm going to turn to the next question, which is actually a little difficult for this profession because it's so diverse. But I'll start out with Sonny on this, which is, typically for large swatches of people in the music industry, how do they end up in the music profession? And maybe pick one or two examples, because the problem is you've got hundreds of different careers, right? So Sonny, you want to start out?
How do you
get into the profession?
Profession of music?
Yeah, and what's a typical career path? Pick one or two examples, right? Since there are hundreds of careers in music, but maybe one or two typical examples. I mean, yours is one example, right?
Right. Yeah. So I'm a recording artist, and how I got to be a recording artist, you don't just say, oh, I'm going to become a recording artist, but it's a life journey. And so you have to find yourself. What am I good at? What is my passion? Who am I? So like I said, I was an orchestra musician, and that's just not what I wanted to do. And so I took a long time off from music, really just living life, raising kids and all that. And really later, only about 15 years ago, I realized, oh my gosh, when I heard about like recording and what it takes to be an engineer and things like that, I think every one of us is a perfectionist to a certain degree. And as musicians, we're really like perfectionists. And I feel like, well, I love recording because it's once you play it, it's done. Like it doesn't change, right? So the one thing I didn't really like about music is that it's always changing, which is good and bad. That in a performance, you could never get that perfect performance because it's always different than what you just practiced. But recording, once it's done, it's done. And I really like that about it's so practical.
So this is an exact example of what I was saying before, which is how to find something that's a fit, right, with you personally.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So just being very practical person. I raised 2 kids, so it's really about efficiency. And in all of it, I've realized recording is something that I could manage my time, like practice for like a few months and then go to a studio, record for 3 days, and then come back home and do my mother thing. Mm-hmm. So through that, I really got into recording, and I also got into editing as well. I learned it from my engineer, and I love editing because I could already see how the music should fit. So things like that, it's just, it's like a life's journey. You have to find who you are, what's your passion, and it changes over time. Yeah.
So same question for you. And you're allowed to observe about other people as well, not just yourself, right?
And I find that for music as careers, maybe 2 ways. So performance, as I was saying, there's one thing of performance. And in performance, I would count, concertizing or being Lady Gaga as one thing. For me, I did a lot of stuff like pickup work. I would contract and run the choir and the orchestra, say, behind performers coming into casino shows at the casinos in LA, at theaters there. You're unsung, but it's a good way to make a living. Teaching, I think, is the #1 performance thing, because when I teach 3 hours, 3 times a week, all year. And I have a they're a nice bunch of students, but they're graduate students at a high level, and in a way, that's a tough house to play to. So you've got to know
what you're saying.
Yeah, right? And a lot of them are very good. They're world-class players already. So I invite them to challenge me. So that's a challenging and wonderful on your feet thing that you perform so much. That's really performing. Then a church musician. I've been a church musician all my life, and I've run the Catholic, the chapel and the music for the Catholic Center here at Yale since 2000. And that is something that it's, you know, you have Sundays, but you're in that also. And some musicians don't like to do weddings or funerals and things, but you know, that's a very liminal experience in a family's life if there's somebody getting married or dying or whatever, and to go through and to perform at that and to be there with them at that, that is like another, you could stay full-time in that. Those are all performance things. Then there's all the things as a musician, which I've also always enjoyed, that are the non-performance parts. And that I would call, like, just like Sunny's saying, really like a content creator is, you know, nobody's making masterpieces now. We make content, but there's a huge demand for content, and whatever it is, and that even if you are seeking to be a live performer, you would still use. You have lots of different ways now to connect with an audience, and maybe of a kind that you would love to perform for, rather than you have to perform for whoever is paying. And that's, I would say, like, find yourself. You know what? I wouldn't find myself. I would go out and make mistakes as fast as I can, and then find the edge of where I'm good at, and the world will tell you.
I hope. Are you the one who's going to explain to Mozart that he only made content?
He did it all. Yeah. Bach. Do you know that Bach had a piano dealership? Bach had the first piano dealership, Forte Piano. So this is what I'm saying. Musicians also, the training is, and a statistic that I'm familiar with, 45 to 46% of people with a degree in music actually make a living in what you would call the music business. The rest do something else. It's actually
like acting. It's the same thing,
acting,
right?
yes. And it's a business that the skills that you learn to play your part. You have to be very disciplined. You have to manage yourself. Even as a kid taking piano lessons from the lady down the street, once a week you make your report to the board of directors, in essence. And in between, you have to learn how to manage your stuff. When you get there, you are responsible for what you've done. And what we learn as musicians, we learn to take criticism without being crushed by saying, this is wrong, you did this, what's up with you?
Well, you know, I want to make one comment, and that is, you know, society is really not fair, right? And the reality is, different professions are not necessarily rewarded economically in relation to their contribution to society, right? I'm in investment banking. I'm the first one to admit that investment bankers are paid more than their actual contribution to society. I know it's a shock, right, to my colleagues in investment banking, and yet teachers, right, or you know, are actors and musicians. I think it's the other way, or architects, right? We had one on architecture, and one of the panelists said, someone asked me, how do you make a lot of money in architecture? And she said, marry a wealthy person. She said, that's the only guaranteed way. Now, I have a special question for you, which only you are allowed to answer, Sonny, and that is, you know, there was criticism at Grammys 2 years ago that there was only one woman nominated or something like that, and all of the MCs were all male. And so now they went the other way, and I don't think there were any men in the Grammys last night or whatever. So on this issue of you know, the special issue about being a woman in the music profession, I mean, you had kids, you know, and so forth. Tell me your perspective on, for the women who are in the audience here, which there are quite a few, and I'm sure online, what are the things that, from your perspective, about being a woman, they just have to be, you know, you have to reconcile with? I mean, it's just, that's what life is all about, right? What do you have to do that's different? What are the things you have to accept or not accept? We had a woman who was a doctor in the medical one, and she said, I love being a doctor, but here are the 5 things. If you don't accept that, you know, you shouldn't be a doctor if you're a female, right? She says, doesn't mean you shouldn't be a doctor, but these are the things that you have to reconcile with.
Oh, well, I never thought of it that way, but being a woman, I mean, it's just, I love being a woman. There's nothing that I need to...
And you're going to stick with it, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like, there's nothing that for me, anything is possible. Because in music, we grew up thinking, anything is possible. We could do it this way. We could do it this way.
But do you think there is any kind of unfairness in the profession, right?
In the profession.
For people who are women?
Maybe in the conductor.
Years ago, conductor would have been very rare for a female conductor, but that's
nowadays,
been it's a long time ago.
Okay.
Orchestra musicians are filled with a lot of women in orchestra. I think music is one industry where it's not as severe as other because it's talent based, right?
Well, I don't know. There's some talent based professions that are unfair.
But really like if you're it's just listening. If you listen to two people behind the screen and it's a behind the screen thing also. So you can't really choose one person because they're male. And
there's a famous story about I won't mention the profession where they were interviewing people for jobs, and then they put a screen, and there was discrimination against women, and the reason why is because they could hear the high heels. So it was interesting. Now the next question is, not everyone is suited for being in different parts of music, right? So the good news is the three of you have had a lot of experience. So you've seen a lot of people enter the profession, succeed, not succeed, and so forth. And I know generalization is a little bit unfair, but what do you think are some of the characteristics of the people who tended to do well and are happy versus people who either didn't do well or weren't happy? I mean, it's possible for someone to be successful and unhappy as well, right? Mm-hmm. So any comments, but this is not looking at yourself, but rather looking at all of the people that you've seen in the profession. And maybe we start with you.
Sure. How something is sustainable over a lifetime, I think is a question probably for everybody in every profession at some level. But I mean, one of the things that it changes. I mean, I think that the idea of having a creative art being an elastic thing that grows with you or takes your lead in a way and you kind of adapt and understand it in different ways is key. I mean, one of the things, what happens in the beginning is there's so much stimulus when you're first in school. There's so much you're learning, you're curious, you're pulling all these things together. And then, you can get into a job rut where you're doing a day-to-day job and it's, that really redefines your relationship with your art and what you're doing. It becomes a thing of maintaining rather than that initial impulse, which was this expansive, all-encompassing thing. So I can just say for myself, for example, when I started to hit those places, what I found very useful was bringing in other things that stimulated me. So, I read history a lot, I read literature, things that are biographies are very stimulating to me. That's a constant source of renewal from the inside that makes me think about my art and think about it in different ways. So what's sustainable over a long time, I would say, is the thing that individually people could kind of focus on. And the initial joy that you have is something that changes because of your being defined by the role that you assume, either as an institutional figure or what else. And I would say, like, for myself and also my colleagues in the School of Music, most of us have one foot very decidedly outside of Yale. So we have very professional lives that have nothing to do with academia. And that's a really good thing, because that means that we're not entirely defined by this thing, this idea that we have of what music is, right? So I found that particularly useful. So the long term, what's sustainable and what makes somebody happy, I'm kind of doing it through my own lens. But I think, knowing yourself, as you said, is a big thing. But also letting it be elastic and not, the way I think about music is it basically is an accompaniment to who I am as a person. And like my music that I write is what's going on inside. It's not just the thing that I do.
And do you think that that's something that universally people should feel is important if they're pursuing a career in music?
I mean, I wouldn't even, I wouldn't be that prescriptive about it. People will find their own way, but I kind of feel intuitively that, you know, what's sustainable over 50 years of doing this is going to change, and your orientation changes, and what it becomes about, you know, traveling and working with small groups that are non-professional and the excitement that they bring. You know, I was in Tuscaloosa a couple months ago, and the front page of the Tuscaloosa paper said premiere of new tome poem, you know, and I was like, wow, Tuscaloosa newspaper is like the headline is the premiere of this thing. And I had such joy in that, you know, whereas, you know, the New York Times or the Washington Post or Chicago, whatever, it has a little less of a thing. And so your focus on like what brings you joy and sustainability changes. And I think you've got to understand that evolution in yourself and kind of cultivate.
By the way, I think your comment about how a lot of the people who teach at the Yale School of Music and so forth also having a foot outside actually is very good for the students, because there are a lot of, and I won't mention which departments, but there are a lot of departments at Yale where the professors are very much divorced, right, from the outside world. And I think the main benefit there is, at least if a student asks you for advice, you're in a little better position because you have a little better understanding of the outside world than, you know, then I won't mention which other departments, you know, but there are some departments where it's very clear that the professors, you know, are very much focused on internal research. Any comments on the same issue?
I forgot what the question was. What was it?
Well, it had more to do with, you know, what do you see as the kinds of things that people have to focus on as they look about the career and coming in, right?
Yeah, I think as musicians, I was going to say listening to other people is something that really, if you could really own that, it'll help you in any area that you go into, because like as musicians, we're really good. Chamber music, it's all about listening to other people and really timing where they exit so you could go in. So it's a teamwork, team building kind of discipline that we kind of, you know, take it for granted that we have this really powerful skill. And that, you know, I think it's one of these things that if you've been doing it all your life, growing up, taking lessons, listening, and playing with other people in an ensemble situation, I think this is something, a very key characteristics that you could carry on in other professions, where you could be the leader in that group, where you could guide the conversations, you know, to make a difference.
But it does sound, I mean, just listening to the three of you, it's very clear that within music, there's some radically different professions and characteristics. I mean, you're talking about if you're in an ensemble, you have to work in a team-like fashion. Mm-hmm. But if you're a composer, right, you may not have to. You might, but you may not have to, right, at all.
We have to play his music.
No, correct, right? So I think what's interesting about that is there are some professions that clearly there's one style, right? Mm-hmm. You know, that, that it's only a team play, or it's a solo play, whatever. But it seems like in music, there's a wide variety of personalities that could fit or not fit. So the key is figuring out where you fit in.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And that changes over time, just as Chris was saying, at various parts of your life. With any profession that you go in, you want to find a way to refresh and renew yourself so that even your 60s, 70s, and 80s, you're still excited to do it. And whether or not the money's there, I get to do music my whole life. Mm-hmm. So I have, in a way, I've never had a job. I have just done what I wanted to work on at the time. It's the greatest reward ever. And it pays okay. And I would say one thing he was bringing up, like in the beginning, and you brought up that learning the instrument and handling all that, learning something. And then when you got in the job and you just had to play, some of the thrill went. Mm-hmm. And what it is, a lot of musicians are learning machines. They love to learn new things. So a thing to do that is like taking on new projects. But what I found is, as I say, less than half make a living doing that. The other half are doing things, they tend to make great product managers. I know some in here are running nonprofit organizations. They make great because they learn how to handle their thing, and they're very, very responsible. They are a perfectionist. They know how to give criticism and how to take it. and they know how to play well with others. And that's like the perfect thing for kind of the modern growth hacking or lean startup type world that we live in now. And working with people and showing up once a week and putting something together, they make great workers in that kind of a economy. And so software is a place that I became interested in that way. And I meet, in fact, all of the engineers I work with are all musicians with music degrees. And they become a full stack engineer by learning on the side. Right. But we work and we iterate very quickly because we know how to play in a group. And we know how to show up each week with our stuff done. Mm-hmm. So there's always some way, if you decide, you know what, I love learning new stuff, you can do that. And a music degree is something that if you're out looking for a job or you're looking for something that pays besides performing, like I say, I've always had multiple things to conduct, perform at, teach, and then do stuff. It's always to emphasize to somebody, if they say, you have a music degree, and you want to do this, yes, and you just have to emphasize. A musician actually is trained to do this, this, this. The instrument with the buttons you push, that's a side thing. Mm-hmm. I could learn any instrument with buttons to push. Most musicians can play lots of different things because they learned how to learn. And they can, therefore, whatever your project is, new language, new script, they know how to learn quickly and how to show up. And that's where, if you can do that, you have a lifelong career.
I think that musicians, because what you just said, so once you finish the undergraduate degree, instead of going to getting a master's degree, mm-hmm. I feel like, with that mind, you could go to marketing, you could go, take a business school, you could go into another field, because that music will never go away.
Right.
It'll only help you when you get into these other areas.
Yeah. But I do think it's very important to really step back and look at the whole picture, right? Because for each of you here in the audience, it's not enough just to pursue something you love. You've got the whole picture about your life and your well-being or your lifestyle and so forth. These things are as important, and hopefully you don't have to make a compromise, right? But the reality is the vast majority of people have to make a choice, right? So that's all I would say. I mean, we had a wonderful panel on drama and film, and we had a very successful playwright who had, at the time she was on the panel, had 2 shows on Off-Broadway that were critically acclaimed, so forth. But she says, I love what I'm doing. I would not trade it for the world, but let me tell you how much I got paid for that play. And during the day, I'm a secretary, right? So he said, would I change it? No, because I accepted that, and I'm okay with that combination. But if I wasn't okay with that combination, then I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And that's really, I think an important lesson for all of you, because although we all like to, there's a glamour of saying, do what you love and so forth, but the reality is you have life and bills to pay and all these other things in life. Maybe you want to have family. And so you have to balance all those and reconcile it yourself, right, with what you feel comfortable with, right?
Yeah. And with musicians, just as I was saying, that the discipline or finding out as you go along with life, if you don't have that discipline, and there are people who love to go in a practice room, practice, mechanically learn something, and then just do it. Those ones, that's with the demise of the big orchestras and stuff. There are, and I've known people that didn't have the discipline, didn't have that kind of more like homogenous view of life and music as being the same thing. And as soon as they got their degree, they were waiting, okay, mm-hmm. Who wants me? Right. Yeah, I'm ready to play. And they were at the time at the video store behind the counter then. Yeah. They were, because they just never got what they learned in music school was not this piece, was not this button pushing. Mm-hmm. They didn't learn what it was. And that is something that you can go at, not here so much, because to gain entry into Yale, into the School of Music, it's a kind of a high barrier. Mm-hmm. But there are lots of music schools where you might go in, or lessons or whatever, and you are so focused on this mechanical stuff or the fact that you'll be on stage, and you will likely be disappointed.
Well, one of the things I liked about what Sonny said was being proactive. In other words, not just be reactive and say, okay, I'm going to pursue a career, right, and react, but be proactive. So she's talking about entrepreneurs, and she's trying to create opportunities that otherwise wouldn't exist. I'll tell you a small story. A good friend of mine is Clive Gillinson, who is the head of Carnegie Hall. He started out as a cellist, and then he was in the London Symphony Orchestra, and the head of the London Symphony Orchestra resigned under pressure, and he was temporarily promoted to be the head of the London Symphony Orchestra. Now, all he knew how to do was play the cello, so he thought that was really an interesting transition. But he made that transition to think about what are the economics of the London Symphony Orchestra, and then he became head of Carnegie Hall. And what he said is, part of what he thinks is important in life is to be a driver of the change, right? He said, if I wait around for people, you know, to passively, it's not going to happen. So he said, Carnegie Hall, a wonderful venue, I'm going to change it so that I intersect in a more relevant way with the audience. So he has series with artists in residence in Jamesdale and various other things or themes that appeal to the audience. And that has made a difference. So that's just one example. But even as musicians or composers or whatever, you ought to say, okay, rather than just saying, I'll pick what looks like the best flavor in front of me, you ought to say, look, how can I be proactive, right? And create an opportunity, right?
Yep.
That didn't exist,
That's
right?
right.
And that's what you do, right? It's clear, right? You're somewhat, you know, you're like a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, right?
Yeah, even the pieces that I play, there are many clarinet pieces, but I like to play other pieces. I like to play violin piece. I like to play cello piece. I like to play piano piece on the clarinet. So it's the same thing. I keep the integrity of the classical music, but it's a different flavor.
Yeah.
You know?
What I'd like to do is now open it up to questions from the audience and also from those of you who are online. So we'll arbitrarily start with people here, since it's easy for me to call on them. So any kind of question that you want to ask, just raise your hand. Yes? But you'll have to speak up because the microphone's over here.
So my question is kind of in regards to what you were talking about with the private orchestras and what you were talking about in regards to Carnegie Hall and being proactive in finding new audiences and that kind of thing. Like, I guess in your opinion, do you think that Carnegie Hall has done a better job relative to these other orchestras of kind of changing their dynamic between audiences or just how they approach the field in general?
I would say one thing about that. I mean, one of I have a colleague, David Lang, who's a very interesting guy. He started he and two of his friends from Yale at the time they were students started a group called Bang on a Can. And what they decided to do was they said, you know, we're going to have a hard time changing the Lincoln Center audience to come around to entertaining both Steve Reich and Milton Babbitt and all this stuff kind of in a big soup. But like, where are people interested in new things? And he said, well, the art galleries and in theater. That's where they're used to getting a lot of new. So he basically changed the venue. He basically said, we're going to go to where people are interested in new things, and we're going to make that happen. And that kind of way of thinking, I think, is part of the solution. The long-term relevance of what we're doing is that you constantly have to ask, you know, why is this really interesting to me? And who else might be like me that would be interested in it? And start from that, because those were going to be your core interests. I mean, Clive Gillinson did some amazing things there. I mean, and it's going to go into a different direction now, and it's really interesting what's happening. But I mean, I think part of it is recognizing the solution or seeing a solution for building a greater energy around what you're doing. I mean, when I think about the orchestras that are successful now, they're really about the image and the commitment and the individual conductor first. Like, the conductor is leading the charge, and if they don't have the right personality for that community, for that thing, it's going to sink. It's just, or it's going to stagnate, which is the same thing. So, I mean, I think that, you know, part of it, you have to, we're so like committed to making local energy in what we're doing and not just thinking about like a brand thing, but that comes from a really local way of thinking too, and like trying to make that work. And I guess that would be where I would say a lot of the energy has to go now.
Yeah, and my comment is, you know, thinking about what Clive did, but also what a lot of other people are doing is where they're trying to change in a way, the example is how they're trying to create more of an immersive experience, right, in music and so forth, rather than a static, just sit there and listen, right? And you see that in museums, right? It used to be you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and there's just a painting, so you go to eat and then go to another painting. Then they have little audio things, so maybe it could tell you something. But now they've got visual things that change, and you can see how the change in the Islamic, history over this and that. And they're trying to engage people. Another good example is Tandun, who I think many of you know, who famous for, composing the Crouching Lion film score. But he recently did a marvelous symphony that was based on a secret language that some Chinese woman in a village way out in the west of China. But instead of just having the orchestral piece, he had visual images, right? And the sounds of their language that were on the screen and interspersed. And that became a wonderful experience in the audience. So the same genre, right, which is composing a symphony, but trying to find innovative ways using technology and others to make it a better experience, right? And that's what Clive Gillinson is doing. He's trying to change it so otherwise you just have more and more people with blue hair in the audience, right? Over time, and he's changed that dramatically.
I'm thrilled to hear you talking about economics, and I know that money for the arts in America have been a problem for a long time. I mean, like we can look back to the Dvorak's writings about the lack of funding for the arts in America. I know that for students in sciences, you can go through a PhD program in physics, and you can go on and do research, or you can teach physics, or you can go into lobbying. And so I'm wondering if you have any opinion about artists getting involved from a public standpoint to help regulate the arts from a more governmental perspective. I know we have like the NEA, but our primary funding models are private right now. So I just wondered if you had any comments about how to make our public connection more vibrant.
May I say something quickly about that? Mm-hmm. While it's true we don't have governmental support in the same way that, and by the way, now in Europe it's also a problem. It's not the same as it was. We are in some ways the envy of the world from the standpoint of arts fundraising. I mean, when you look at the list of donors, corporate donors, foundations, it's staggering how much is in play from that. Mm-hmm. And like, I actually think in some ways, I mean, yes, we should definitely push the government to be involved in that kind of thing. But I think actually, the corporate connection, the foundational connection, all those things happen interpersonally, and you have as good a chance, if not better, of bringing somebody on board as a supporter of the arts, as somebody who's going to really get behind it and get excited about it, as you do convincing the government to do that. And I'm not saying that as a libertarian or anything like that. I just mean that, like, practically speaking, my own point of view is that, in my experience, has been bringing people on board is the way to do it, period. And it's the energy that you create, and that often can happen at the corporate level or whatever. But I think that's
those people bought in, and then that's your audience. They are excited about the thing that they support, so they help to bring audience. They bring energy to it, much better than, say, a grant. Mm-hmm. A grant may be a thing like then you have to do a tax return. Now it's a hassle.
And the good news is, at least in the U.S., there's a strong history of philanthropy towards the arts and towards music. That is not true in other countries. For example, China, it's just not true, right? They just don't give for the arts.
Changing, I think, now.
The data shows that they're coming around, but it's on a relative basis pretty modest.
But musicians have thought there's not enough money for music since zero. So there's never enough money for music.
So I have something to say about that. Is that I feel like when you bring it down to a really personal level, just like what you were saying about, it's really about knowing somebody, getting them really excited about your project, and having them become your patron. So in any business, it's really about how you connect with that one person first, and really conveying your passion about your project, and then getting them to support you. And it's like when you have one person, then you could do the same thing with another person. And I feel like just growing from small to big is a sure bet than applying for a grant that you don't know whether you're going to get or not. So, to answer to your question, I like to start small and just start building little bit at a time. And pretty soon you'll have a whole army of people that's going to support you in your project.
And one of the reasons why maybe Clive Gillinson ended up where he was is he had a particular talent at bringing people along for some vision that he could imagine, and people would get excited about it and do that. And that is how he ended up from a cellist into the director of Carnegie Hall, because it's partly what he does well in addition to all those other things.
Yeah, he's pretty amazing. And I remember talking to him a number of years ago, and he said when he first joined Carnegie Hall, he was frightened to death because the amount of money you have to raise at Carnegie Hall is somewhat larger than LSO. But he finally said, I finally figured out, he says, I love music. And if I just talk to people who love music and they connect with me, then that's how it's going to work. And that's how he's done it. And so he's found a way to really do that. And there were more questions here. Yes, go ahead.
Quick question. Coming from a little bit, probably an older standpoint than what you were there. Could anyone speak about getting back into the arts? I was a cheer physician since age 10, recent alumni, Yale alumni, investment banker as well. I have to say, I've had a really difficult time over the last 18 months striking the right chord with any organization in the university to get back in the arts and to use all of these skills to do it. I'm just wondering if anyone has any advice or...
What instrument do you play?
Piano and organ.
Yeah.
Hence the church music part.
Yeah, but to get into it from a business perspective, having like all four of these like components in my life.
Yeah,
and how do you use that?
Yeah, so so I feel like you have so much. So if you could create a product and present it, then I think that's a better, like if you have a plan and then you go to a place and then you say, here's my plan, that's a better in than here I am, instead of you fitting into other place, have them fit into your idea. Maybe that's one way to,
Are you looking to perform, or you're looking to manage an organization that performs, or?
Yeah, I'm sure there's so many organizations who would love your talent, and you're sure. Yeah. So this is what I'm saying. If you could come up with a concrete idea, this is what I really want to do. I look at this organization, this is what's missing, and you could create a plan and just present them, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, come, welcome.
Yeah, I think, to do it a little bit systematically, that is, go to these concerts, try to figure out which ensembles, which kind of groups appeal to you. Maybe get involved in the board for a couple of years, listen a lot, find out what the vibe is for the place. Each place is so different internally, politically, and otherwise. And then bring it, bring what you have to offer.
And you might look just in lots of different kinds of music. If you can, besides getting on boards, if you can, there's various places, maker labs, or places where people might be hacking things. And there's lots of like open office things in the city. If you can get in there, there's lots of startup companies that will have maybe music performance is not the thing, but it is music or content of some kind. And if you have all of these hats that you can wear, that might be the place to look, I think. And that music is the one thing, and they may or may not have music as a major part of what they're trying to promote, sell, or whatever. But I would do that rather than going to the institutions that are kind of like, it's like investing in Encyclopedia Britannica in 1999. That you wouldn't want to do. So I would look in that part of the economy that's growing that way, and you have all the talents that they need, other than maybe you're not a full stack engineer, but they've got those. So
yeah,
go
and
that way.
One comment I make is that pretty much every profession has areas where there is an imbalance of supply and demand. And, if you generalize about theater, you could say, well, gee, there was way too many talented people for positions. But if you look in segments, for example, my son's involved with technology as it applies to entertainment. There are fewer people who are skilled to be able to do that. And so the supply and demand is in favor of the people who have that skill, right? Yet also have the knowledge and appreciation of the theatrical part. So I'm sure if you canvass around and look around, you'll find some places where supply and demand, and if it intersects with your skills, that'd be terrific. Or where there's a tremendous amount of growth, which it's essentially the same thing, which is tremendous amount of growth creates an imbalance of supply and demand in terms of talent. And, I would look at that and see, and as opposed to going where supply and it's mature and supply and demand has been imbalanced in the wrong way for a long time.
And look on the boards like, Reddit boards, GitHub, where those people are, go to those places, and then you'll see, because they're not maybe advertising in the Wall Street Journal for what you're looking for, but they're there.
Now, we've taken a couple questions here from the live audience. I'm going to ask Trish and Julie if there is a question from the online audience that pops out.
One quick question. Each of you have talked about the importance of developing connections with collaborators, musical, financial, or otherwise. What was the conversation that had the most impact for your career?
Repeat the last part. What was the
conversation that had
conversation? Okay. Panelists?
I would say, the thing, it's not so much a conversation. I mean, people learn so differently. Some people learn by direct advice. I feel like you observe people acting a certain way, and that influences the way you kind of orient in a way. And I would say that the people who I admire the most, we had a colleague here who was 90 and still teaching, Ezra Latterman. This was actually not even Aldo Periso, it was 100. It was 100. And you just notice the way people are over time and how they're able to keep it light and do that. And I think that you're around a lot of really extraordinary people, and part of it is just paying attention to that. And in the arts in particular, it's not a cookie cutter thing. So, everybody is really super unique and different, and some people are very maladjusted and not socially adept. There are so many things, and you're so used to that. You're so used to that, but what you pick up on them that they do particularly well is the thing that pulls you forward in a way more than I would say even straight advice sometimes.
One thing I like to say is that because in music, people know what we do because we perform, we conduct, we compose. But when it comes to relationship with your followers, your audience, it's really we don't know anything about them. And one thing that I like to do is really get to know them, because they already know about me. But I ask them, so do you play an instrument? Do you play the clarinet? And really get involved in their life and see what makes their passion for music come out to a concert. And if you could relate to anybody in that level, a personal level, I think that's the conversation where it could grow into many different beautiful things.
For me, when I was in high school, I was getting a lot of gigs playing, and a critical thing for me, I think, as the conversation was noticing what all went into this thing. I played in a pit band for a beauty pageant. It was a gig, and I just loved playing and getting paid. But I realized all the stuff going on, and I went and talked to the guy when I got my little packet of cash. How do you put this together? And it was interesting to me to realize that really the music lived in a space that there was one guy, the producer, that created the space for us all to be in and do our thing. And he needed us, but we wanted, and I just asked him, how do you do this? What is this? And he said, you can help me. So always in something like that, as you are someplace, whatever you're doing, to notice the other things that go into it, and just talk to them about it. And they may or may not, you've got a gig.
Now, sadly, we are run out of time. We still had people who had their hands raised here, and I'm sure there were more questions than we answered online. A couple of things. One is, those of you here physically here, we have some wine and snacks and so forth, so our panelists have graciously agreed to stay, not because of the quality of the wine, but because they want to talk to you. And Those of you who are online who are close by, please rush over. We have a nice white and a red. But the other is, if you have any questions that weren't answered today because we ran out of time, please, we'll pull some off the chat history, all right? So we'll be able to do that. But also, please email it to yalecareerpanels@gmail.com, and we will actually try to distribute it to the panelists and so that if they want to respond to some of these, that they can. Last, I want to really thank the panelists who I think you would all agree did a wonderful job in spite of the fact that no one's a hip hop artist here, right? We're not. Music is fun. So I got a group of people together and we jam every couple of weeks. We tape the mirrors to make sure when they crack, that they won't crack. But whether we perform or not, it's really something of great joy, and even if it's just for yourself. And I so I want to say that although I'm an investment banker and run an investment bank, music still is an important part of my life. So again, thanks everyone. And for those of you who want to learn about artificial intelligence, we're going to have one later this spring, and we'll send you notices about that, in fact. So thank you very much.
Thank you.